"Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours," the little girl said, her voice pulling James Harrington from his thoughts. He sat alone on a worn bench in Central Park, autumn leaves swirling around him like golden confetti. His tailored suit clashed with the park's simplicity as he absently twisted his grandmother's sapphire ring, a habit from years of solitude. The children's laughter nearby only deepened the emptiness of his towering empire, built on lonely dinners, endless meetings, and a mansion too big for one man. The girl's words lingered, stirring secrets he thought were long buried. "Your ring shines like a star," came a childish, melodious voice that cut through his thoughts. James lowered his eyes and found a pair of curious green eyes staring up at him. The little girl, with red braids and freckles on her nose, showed no hesitation about his usually austere demeanor. "My name is Lily," she continued, moving closer without ceremony. "May I take a closer look?" Something about the innocence of that moment made James smile, a gesture his employees swore was rarer than a solar eclipse. "Of course," he replied, holding out his hand so she could inspect the jewel. "It's incredible," exclaimed Lily, her eyes shining with fascination. "My mother has one just like it." The world seemed to freeze for an instant. James felt as if the air had been sucked out of his lungs. The ring was unique, commissioned for his grandmother, Eleanor Harrington, in 1955. There was no other like it. "Lily, don't bother him," called a female voice from a distance. A young woman in her 30s hurried toward them. "But Mom, look, it's just like your ring," insisted Lily, pointing to James's hand. The woman, who introduced herself as Catherine Mitchell, visibly paled at the sight of the jewel. Her lips trembled slightly, and James noticed she had unconsciously touched a silver cord around her neck, likely where her own ring hung. "I apologize for intruding with my daughter," said Catherine, her voice betraying an emotion that went beyond mere social embarrassment. "Lily has a very vivid imagination." "No problem at all," James said, standing up. His analytical eye, honed by years of negotiation, picked up on subtle details about Catherine, her natural poise, the delicate features that reminded him of someone from his past, and especially her reaction upon seeing the ring that A.S. mother and daughter walked away. James remained motionless, his mind racing. His grandmother's last words echoed in his memory. "There are secrets in our family, James, that the ring holds. When the time is right, you will know." On that ordinary fall afternoon, James Harrington was certain he had stumbled upon one of those secrets. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond the boredom that had consumed him, a burning curiosity. The wind blew stronger, lifting more golden leaves as if nature itself wanted to mark the moment. He looked at the ring again, realizing perhaps his grandmother had been right. The time had come. The morning after his encounter in the park, James arrived earlier than usual at his office on the 50th floor of the Harrington building. The rising sun painted Manhattan in golden hues, but his mind was far from that dazzling view. Sitting down in his leather armchair, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk, revealing an old cedar box he hadn't touched in years. The scent of the wood enveloped him as his hands trembled slightly, lifting the lid to uncover the last tangible memories of his grandmother Eleanor. Yellowed photographs, carefully folded letters, and a diary bound in faded red leather. "Mr. Harrington, your first meeting starts in 20 minutes. His assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Cancel everything," he replied without hesitation. "I'm not available to anyone today." Picking up the first photograph, James observed his grandmother in her younger years. The image captured a moment in 1955 during a garden party at the Harrington mansion. Eleanor was smiling radiantly, her eyes shimmering with a joy he had rarely witnessed in person. Next to her, partially cut out of the picture, stood a man whose face had been deliberately torn away. "What were you hiding, Grandma?" he muttered, turning the photo over. On the back, a delicate inscription read, "Summer 1955, the beginning of everything." James opened the diary, its pages still carrying Eleanor's faint fragrance, a blend of lavender and old paper. One entry, dated June 15th, 1955, caught his eye. "Today, I met someone who changed everything. Richard has eyes that seem to see into my soul. He doesn't care about names or family fortunes. When I'm with him, I'm just Eleanor, not a Harrington. But I know our happiness has an expiration date. Dad would never allow. The ringing of the telephone interrupted him. It was Maxwell, his trusted private investigator. "Mr. Harrington, I found some information on Catherine Mitchell," came Maxwell's deep voice. Her maiden name was Catherine Collins. She works as an art restorer at the Metropolitan Museum. She was widowed 2 years ago. Husband died in a car accident. But there's more. Her birth certificate has some inconsistencies. James's heart pounded. What kind of inconsistencies? The original records seem to have been altered. And there's something else. I found a connection to a name that might interest you. Richard Collins. The name hit James like a punch. Richard, the same man from Eleanor's diary. "Keep investigating," James ordered, hanging up. Returning to the diary, he skimmed the pages until one entry made his blood run cold. September 20th, 1955. "Today I gave my heart to Richard, along with the ring Mother left me. He swore he would keep it forever as a symbol of our forbidden love. If this ring ever returns to the Harrington family, it will mean our paths will cross again." James shut the diary. Could the ring Lily mentioned be that same ring? How had it come back to his grandmother, who then passed it on to him on her deathbed? He stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the city below. His meticulously ordered life was about to be uprooted by secrets hidden decades before. The reflection in the glass showed a very different man from the cold, calculating executive he was reputed to be. He was now a grandson, longing to understand his grandmother's complex legacy. He picked up the phone and dialed the Metropolitan Museum. After a few moments on hold, a soft voice answered. "Restoration Department, Catherine Mitchell speaking." James inhaled deeply. "Ms. Mitchell, this is James Harrington. I believe we need to discuss a certain ring." The silence on the other end was deafening. Café Artemis, a discreet establishment on the Upper East Side, appeared frozen in time with its Art Deco furniture and crystal chandeliers. Catherine Mitchell was already seated at a quiet table when James arrived punctually at 2 in the afternoon. She was nervously fiddling with the cord around her neck, the same one James had noticed in the park. "Mrs. Mitchell," James greeted her, taking the seat opposite. Up close, the features that had once seemed vaguely familiar screamed of the photographs he had studied that very morning. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. Please, call me Catherine," she replied, her fingers still tangled around the cord. "I admit I was surprised by your call. I didn't think a Harrington would be interested in speaking with me." James noticed how she spoke his last name with a mixture of reverence and something else, perhaps resentment. "I think there's a lot we need to talk about," he said, pulling out an old photo from his inside jacket pocket. "Do you recognize anyone here?" Catherine's hands trembled as she took the picture. The same garden scene from the Harrington mansion, with Eleanor smiling and a man's face partly torn from view. "My God," she whispered, eyes brimming with tears. "It's him, my grandfather Richard." The confirmation hit James like a wave. His suspicions were materializing into reality. "Catherine, may I see the ring you're wearing?" After a short pause, she removed the cord to reveal a ring identical to James's. The blue sapphire glinted under the cafe lighting, as if recognizing its twin. "My grandfather Richard gave me this ring on his deathbed," Catherine explained, her voice shaking. "He told me a story of a forbidden love and an impossible choice. He said the ring was proof not all love can be erased by time or money." James slid his own ring off, placing it beside hers. They were perfectly identical, down to the smallest scratch. "My grandmother Eleanor told me something similar," he confided, "but I never really understood what she meant." "How long have you known about this connection?" "Since Lily was born," Catherine answered. "When I saw your name in the news, I started researching. The timelines, the details, everything fit. But what could we do? The Harringtons are untouchable." James gave a bitter smile. "That's always been our image. But you know, Catherine, a lifetime of being untouchable is also a lifetime of being alone." A heavy silence hovered between them, broken only by the subdued clinks of cups in the background. "There's something else you should see," Catherine said, opening her purse and removing a yellowed envelope. "These are letters my grandfather kept, letters from Eleanor. He never opened them after everything ended." James accepted the envelope reverently. "Why show them to me now?" "Because Lily saw something in you at the park, something beyond the Harrington name or wealth. She saw someone seeking a connection, like the rest of us. Asterisk at that moment, the waitress approached to take their orders, but they barely noticed. They were caught in a pivotal moment where the sins and secrets of the past were surfacing. There's one more thing, Catherine added, tentative. I discovered something recently about the day my grandfather and your grandmother separated. Something that changed our family's course forever. James leaned forward, heart pounding. What happened that day? It wasn't their choice, Catherine said, her words laden with meaning. It was a trap set by someone very close to them, someone still alive, who to this day guards the greatest secret of all. Somewhere in the cafe, the sound of a cup shattering seemed to punctuate the gravity of her revelation. James felt the burden of generations of lies and secrets, and he stared at the ring in his hand, no longer merely a family jewel, but a key to an unfolding mystery. The Harrington mansion towered against the gray autumn sky, its Victorian windows reflecting the muted afternoon light. James led Catherine through the manicured gardens, ablaze in reds and golds, the same gardens that, decades before, had borne witness to Eleanor and Richard's forbidden love. It's exactly like the pictures, Catherine murmured, her eyes roaming over ivy-draped arches and weathered statues. My grandfather used to draw this place from memory, every detail, every angle. James paused at a stone bench half covered in dead leaves. This was her favorite spot, he said, voice laden with memory. Grandma would spend hours here, especially in her final years. Now I know why. They entered the mansion, the smell of old wood and beeswax enveloping them. James led Catherine to the second-floor library, a sanctuary of rare books and carefully preserved mementos. The dark oak bookshelves reached all the way up to a high ceiling, and a spiral iron staircase provided access to the lofted volumes. I need to show you something, James said, gesturing to what looked like a normal panel on the wall. With a deliberate push, he triggered a hidden mechanism that opened a secret compartment. I found this a few weeks ago, but never had the courage to open it. He lifted out a black velvet box, larger than the one in his office. Catherine stepped closer, her breathing quickening. These are the letters she never sent, James explained, opening it carefully. And what's this? Beneath the letters lay a black leather notebook embossed in gold with the initials. YH. Unlike the diary James had already read, this one seemed even more personal, more secret. To be opened only when the sapphires meet again, Catherine read on the first page. She knew this day would come. As they turned the pages, a loose photograph slipped onto the floor. Catherine picked it up, her face going pale. It can't be, she whispered. It depicted Eleanor, Richard, and a third man in a formal office. On the back, the date read October 15th, 1955, with a note, the day of betrayal, GH. GH, James repeated. George Harrington, my grandfather. But how? I thought your grandfather didn't know. Apparently he knew a lot more than we realized. James said grimly that a noise from the corridor made them look to the library door. An elderly man, leaning on an ebony cane, appeared. Though time had etched itself into his features, he bore the unmistakable Harrington pride. I expected this day would come, George Harrington said in a gravelly but firm voice. When I heard about Catherine's husband's accident in the news, I knew it was only a matter of time. James felt his blood run cold. You knew this whole time? George hobbled over to an armchair, lowering himself into it. I knew everything. In fact, I orchestrated their breakup. Catherine took a step forward, anger flashing in her eyes. How could you? You destroyed the lives of two people who loved each other. To save them, George said, his stare fixed on a distant corner of the library. You have no idea. Back then, there was more at stake than just their forbidden affair. James tightened his hold on Eleanor's notebook. Then help us understand. After all these years, don't you think we deserve the truth? George looked out the window, watching leaves swirl in the wind. The truth, he echoed, is that Eleanor and Richard weren't the only ones with a secret. There was something much darker within the Harrington family, something that could have destroyed not only them, but all of us. Silence weighed heavily. Catherine sank into a nearby chair, her hands trembling. James remained standing, trying to piece together the implications. Asterisk, it's time, George declared, turning back to them. It's time you heard about the night Eleanor discovered those documents. The real reason Richard had to leave. and the price we paid to keep it all hidden. As the afternoon shadows lengthened across the library, 3 generations prepared to face truths buried for decades beneath silence. George settled into his armchair, the leather creaking beneath him. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, shadows dancing over the lined shelves. In 1955, he began, voice trembling with regret. Harrington Enterprises was at risk of collapse, not financial collapse, as many feared, but moral collapse. My father, William Harrington, had built part of his fortune through dealings with questionable partners during the war. James perched on the edge of a table. What kind of dealings? Forged documents, new identities for people who should have faced judgment for war crimes. George explained, running a hand over his face. Eleanor discovered them by accident. She found the files hidden in the same compartment where you just found that notebook. Catherine sprang to her feet. And Richard? What was his role in this? George gave a bitter laugh. Richard Collins was an undercover federal investigator. At first, he approached Eleanor for the investigation, but he really fell in love, Catherine said, eyes brimming. Yes, George nodded. Once I discovered his identity, I realized we were at a dangerous impasse. If the investigation continued, it wouldn't just destroy my father. Countless other families would be ruined, some of them innocent. James looked out at the garden beyond the windows. So you interfered. I gave Richard a choice, George said, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Go through with his investigation, expose everything, and destroy not just the Harringtons, but also Eleanor, who'd be labeled complicit for not immediately turning over the documents. Or leave, Catherine whispered, finally understanding. Leave and never return, taking only the ring as a token of the love he had to sacrifice. George gripped his cane. Eleanor never knew the real reason. She believed Richard had simply abandoned her. James swung around. Why confess now? Because I'm dying, James, George answered steadily. Cancer. I have 3 months, give or take. And because you 2-inch, he glanced from James to Catherine, deserve the chance they never had, the chance to set right what was wrong. Catherine pulled off her ring, staring at the sapphire glinting in the firelight. There's more, isn't there? The documents still exist, George admitted. Your grandmother hid them somewhere in this mansion before she passed. She left clues in that diary. Why hide them? James asked. Eleanor was clever, George responded sadly. She knew the truth had to come out one day, but not until it could no longer destroy those who were innocent. Silence filled the library. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the trees, swirling the leaves in a ghostly dance. There's something else, George said in a near whisper. About your husband's accident, Catherine. It wasn't an accident. She went pale, hands clenching. The arms of her chair. What? He was investigating the same case Richard did decades earlier. He got too close to the truth. Someone alive today still wants these secrets buried, George said, not finishing the sentence. His gaze was lost in the dark corners of the library. James gently placed a hand on Catherine's shoulder. We have to find those documents, he said resolutely. Not just for the historical record, but for the justice your husband was after. Catherine nodded, wiping away a tear. Eleanor left clues in her diary. She wanted us to discover them together. The first clue, George said, pulling himself shakily to his feet, is in the initials on the cover, EH. It doesn't just stand for Eleanor Harrington. It was her code for eternal hope, the place it all began. James and Catherine exchanged glances. Their pursuit of the truth was only just beginning, carrying with it the promise of justice and redemption, echoing across generations. The basement of the Harrington mansion smelled of time long forgotten. James led the way, with a flashlight, illuminating piles of draped furniture and dusty crates. Catherine followed close behind, diary in hand, reading from the notes they had painstakingly deciphered. Where eternal hope meets the rising sun, look for the moment when love overcame fear, Catherine repeated for the 10th time. Your grandmother had a penchant for riddles. James stopped at a large oak door. The conservatory, he said, turning the rusty knob. She loved watching the sunrise here. The conservatory was a magnificent Victorian structure, its floor-to-ceiling glass walls now smudged with dust. Vines had pushed through the cracks in the panes, weaving themselves into the iron framework. It's beautiful, Catherine breathed. taking in the space. I can almost picture them here. Grandma used to say this was the one place in the mansion she felt truly free, James remarked, sweeping his flashlight around the space. She called it eternal hope. They spoke in unison. Catherine approached an old grand piano, its keys yellow with age. A picture frame lay face down on top. Brushing off the dust revealed a photo of Eleanor and Richard, young and beaming, seated at the same piano. "James, look," Catherine whispered, turning the frame over. Written on the back were the words, "The moment love overcame fear." James peered at the photo more closely. "Wait, look at the sheet music in the photo. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata." Carefully, he opened the piano's lid. On the stand lay the aged score they had seen in the picture, but as they lifted it, they realized it wasn't simply music. It was a detailed map of the mansion, hand-drawn among the musical notes. "She was brilliant," James murmured. "She used music as a code. Each note corresponds to a location. And look here." Catherine pointed to a series of notes highlighted in faded red ink. "They form a path. Following the musical code, they crossed the conservatory to a section of the wall that appeared solid." James ran his fingers along the surface until a small mechanism clicked, revealing a hidden stairwell descending into darkness. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, seeing Catherine hesitate. She slipped her ring onto her finger. "My husband died seeking the truth. I won't turn back now." The narrow steps led to a tiny chamber, no larger than a storage closet. Dozens of photographs and documents covered the walls, connected by red string that formed a vast web of connections. "My God," Catherine breathed, scanning the evidence. It wasn't just were criminals. There was a whole network: money, laundering, trafficking, stolen art. James's face turned pale as he read name after name. Many still powerful figures. Catherine spotted a particular envelope, which held a letter dated just a week before her husband's fatal accident. "James," she said, voice trembling. "Michael found all this. He was so close to exposing it." Their thoughts were interrupted by footsteps echoing on the stairs. Slowly, someone descended, accompanied by the tap of a cane. "Remarkable detective work," said a calm voice that didn't belong to George Harrington. Eleanor always did keep meticulous notes. In the dim glow of the flashlight, Maxwell, James's own investigator, emerged, a gun in hand. "You see," Maxwell went on, his voice eerily level, "I've spent decades protecting these secrets. First for your grandfather, then for others who wanted them buried. Your father, James, he was determined to do the same thing you're doing now. That's why his yacht exploded 15 years ago." James felt his world tilt. "You killed my father?" Maxwell shrugged. "Just as I had to deal with Catherine's husband. And now, I'm afraid I need to deal with both of you." A gunshot rang out, echoing sharply in the confined space, but it wasn't from Maxwell's weapon. George Harrington stood at the foot of the stairs, gripping an old Colt pistol still smoking at the barrel. "I always knew you were a snake, Maxwell," George said, leaning heavily on his cane. "But I never suspected you'd kill my own son." Blood seeped between Maxwell's fingers as he pressed a hand to his wounded shoulder. "You still don't understand, George," he spat. "You never grasped what was really at stake." James glanced at his grandfather. "How long have you known?" George's voice cracked. "I started suspecting after your father's death. William Jr. was determined to uncover the truth about our family business, just like you, James. But I was too afraid to act." You let people die," Catherine accused, tears of rage in her eyes. "Yes," George admitted, eyes heavy with regret. "That same fear made me separate Eleanor and Richard decades ago. I've always protected our family name over doing the right thing." Maxwell let out a mirthless chuckle. "One final heroic act won't wash away a lifetime of complicity." "No," George agreed sadly. "But I can at least try to set things straight before I go." Outside, sirens wailed, drawing closer to the mansion. "I've already called the authorities," George said. "All these documents, this evidence, everything will be handed over now." Maxwell staggered toward the exit, but James blocked him, driving him into the wall. "That was for my father," he hissed, delivering a knockout punch. Catherine knelt to collect the key documents, her hands shaking. "Michael was so close," she murmured. "So close to blowing this wide open." "Then we'll finish what he started," James said, Helping her gather the files, George's face was etched with sorrow as he watched. Eleanor always said this day would come. She left these clues so the two of you could find each other. Why didn't you warn us about Maxwell? James demanded as police sirens rang out from the driveway. Asterisk. I had to be sure, George replied simply. Sure he was the murderer. Sure you two were strong enough to face it. Catherine discovered another letter among the documents, addressed to her in Eleanor's neat handwriting. Dear Catherine, if you're reading this, it means the moment I've waited for has finally arrived. The ring your grandfather Richard kept was not just a symbol of our love. It was the key to this truth. Forgive us for allowing so many lies to continue for so long, but please know your grandfather never stopped loving me, just as I never stopped loving him. Sometimes love waits generations for its redemption. Tears ran down Catherine's cheeks as James placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Heavy footsteps announced the arrival of the police. George rose unsteadily, leaning on his cane. Are you ready? He asked his grandson and Catherine. After you hand in these documents, nothing will be the same again. Perhaps it's time. The name Harrington stood for something else, James said. Something like hope, Catherine added softly, clutching Eleanor's final letter to her heart. Police lights illuminated the conservatory. Maxwell, only half conscious, was carried away. George Harrington steeled himself, prepared to reveal the entire story. James and Catherine stood side by side, their identical rings glinting in the light, no longer merely lost artifacts of forbidden love, but emblems of a truth that could finally be told. In the week that followed, Harrington Mansion bustled with investigators cataloging decades of long-hidden secrets. The lavish main hall, once reserved for grand parties, now served as a base of operations for federal agents. From the window of his office in the Harrington building, James surveyed the sparkling Manhattan skyline. The newspaper on his desk bore the headline, Harrington Empire Exposed Decades OLD Scheme Revealed, a penny for your thoughts? Lily piped up from the door, making James turn with a smile. The little girl had become a near constant in his life ever since the truth began to emerge. I was just thinking how one inquisitive little girl changed everything, he said, turning to see Catherine standing behind Lily. Mom says we're moving to the mansion, Lily announced, bounding over to hug James. Is there really a secret garden? Catherine entered, holding an old box. We found more items in the conservatory, she explained. I thought we might want to look at them together. Sitting together on the leather sofa, Lily wandered the room curiously. Catherine opened the box, revealing unopened letters and a small photo album. They're all addressed to Richard, she said softly. Eleanor wrote them, but never mailed them. James picked up a photograph of a young Eleanor seated at the piano in the conservatory, her face glowing with happiness. On the back, a simple note read, The day the music stopped, October 15th, 1955. The day they were separated, Catherine whispered, turning the photo over carefully. Mr. James, Mrs. Catherine, came Lily's voice from the doorway. Grandpa George wants you both in the conservatory. They found George Harrington seated in his favorite chair, watching snowflakes drift past the glass. He looked frail, but there was a serenity in his gaze that James had never seen before. I thought you might want this, George said, holding out a small recording device. Eleanor made this for me the day she gave me her last letter. With trembling hands, James pressed play. Eleanor's voice filled the room. George, my old friend, if you're hearing this, it means you've finally found the courage I always believed you had. The burden of secrets is immense, isn't it? But how freeing to let them go at last. Richard and I knew our love wasn't destined to blossom in our time, but we planted seeds that have finally taken root in James and Catherine. The Eternal Hope Foundation isn't just a means of doing good. It's our pledge that no other families will endure what we did. Use it well. Help James and Catherine expand it into something far greater. And George, I forgive you. I always have. Sometimes fear leads us down paths we'll regret forever. But it's never too late to do what's right. The recording ended, leaving the air charged with emotion. Lily quietly approached George, slipping her small hand into his. It's snowing harder, she observed, pointing to the whirling white outside the glass. It looks like magic. George managed a smile, his voice cracking. Yes, it does. Eleanor used to say the snow was the world cleaning itself up, getting ready for a fresh start. James and Catherine exchanged a determined glance. The revelation of the Eternal Hope Foundation had awakened a sense of purpose, something bigger than merely exposing wrongdoing. "I think I know what we have to do," James said, holding the documents Catherine handed him. "We'll expand the foundation. Use Harrington Enterprises to help other separated families, to fight injustice." "Eleanor would have loved that," George murmured, observing Lily with soft eyes. "To see our family's influence used for good, for hope." Catherine linked her fingers with James's. Around them, the conservatory teemed with new life, flowers and vines reclaiming the once abandoned space. Though shadows of the past lingered, they no longer held sway over the mansion. Something new was being nurtured, something Eleanor and Richard had dreamed of decades ago. Outside, snow continued its silent descent, blanketing Manhattan in a clean white layer. Inside the Harrington mansion, a new chapter began, no longer cloaked in secrecy, but bathed in honesty. Energized by a love spanning generations, spring came to New York in a riot of blossoms. The Harrington Mansion's conservatory, fully restored, shone under the morning sun. Today marked the official inauguration of the expanded Eternal Hope Foundation, and Lily's carefully tended garden was in glorious bloom. James adjusted his tie in Eleanor's old bedroom, now transformed into his personal office. His sapphire ring caught the sunlight, reminding him of the remarkable journey that had led them here. George had passed peacefully that winter, but not before seeing how his ultimate confession had set these changes in motion. "Ready for the big day?" came Catherine's voice as she entered the room. She wore a sapphire blue dress that matched the twin rings they both now bore. "Almost," James said, turning. Lily's double-checking every detail of the garden. Catherine laughed. "She insists the white roses must line up exactly with Eleanor's favorite violets." A gentle hum of music and conversation drifted up from the mansion's lower floor, where visitors, ranging from New York's high society to families the foundation had already helped, were gathering for the ceremony. "I found this earlier," Catherine said, handing James a yellowed envelope. It was hidden inside the piano, near Eleanor's final sheet music. James carefully opened it, immediately recognizing his grandmother's graceful handwriting. "For the day the music plays again, why dear James and Catherine, if you're reading this, it means the conservatory is alive once more with music and the gardens are in bloom. It means the corridors of this house echo with laughter rather than secrets. Richard and I dreamed of this day, a time when the name Harrington would stand for more than power and privilege. It would stand for hope. You have realized that dream. The Eternal Hope Foundation was born from our sorrow, but will flourish through your love. Let it reunite families, heal broken hearts, and build bridges where there were once walls. Lily, our little gardener, is living proof that love finds its own way, no matter how long it waits. She has Richard's eyes, always searching for beauty in the most unexpected places. James, my beloved grandson, you carry your father's strength and, I hope, some of my stubbornness. Catherine, you have Richard's courage and integrity. What we did in the past, holding on to secrets and lies, was a flawed attempt to protect those we loved. But true love needs truth, not protection. The rings you wear aren't just heirlooms. They're symbols that love, once planted, can endure. For generations, even if hidden from view. Care for one another. Protect Lily. And make Harrington Mansion a place of hope instead of a vault of secrets. With eternal love, Eleanor. Tears shimmered in Catherine's eyes by the time James finished reading. From below, they heard Lily begin to play the first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on the restored grand piano, the same piece Eleanor and Richard had once shared. "Mom, Dad," Lily called from the hallway, her voice echoing joyfully. "It's time." James and Catherine exchanged a smile at hearing Lily call them Mom and Dad for the first time. Together, they descended the mansion's sweeping staircase. The conservatory was brimming with flowers of every color, sunlight dancing through refurbished stained glass windows. At the center stood a polished brass plaque, Eternal Hope Foundation in memory of Eleanor Harrington and Richard Collins. True love is never lost. It only waits for the right moment to bloom. James stepped up to a small lectern with Catherine and Lily by his side, scanning the crowd. Families healed, hearts mended, ready for new beginnings. He felt a deep sense of peace. "Welcome to the new era of the Harrington family," he began. "An era not built on secrets, but on truth. Not on power, but on love. My grandmother Eleanor used to say hope is like a seed. It only needs time and the right soil to flourish." Catherine lightly clasped James's hand. Their matching sapphire rings flashed in the daylight, Lily beaming between them. "Today," James continued, "we plant more than flowers here. We plant hope in the hearts of all who need to believe love always finds a way." Spring sunlight illuminated the glass conservatory as the notes of Moonlight Sonata drifted among the flowers. Though Eleanor and Richard were long gone, it felt as though they smiled from the garden Lily had cultivated so carefully. The Harrington mansion, freed from the shadows of its past, had become a beacon of hope. Among the white roses and the violets Eleanor had once cherished, two souls, separated by time, had finally found peace. Their legacy, once hidden in secrets, now blossomed openly, uniting generations. That if you discovered a family heirloom that revealed your family's entire history was built on secrets and lies, would you expose the truth, risking the legacy and reputation of those you love? Or would you keep silent to protect those who are still alive? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.